Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Most Excellent Entertainment Podcast. I'm your host, Keith, and we are here with a man who wears many hats. He is a producer and a director of films, a comedian, a podcaster, an author, a master of ceremonies, a professional wrestling ring announcer. Did I mention podcaster? If I haven't, he's also a podcaster. Mr. Flobo Boyce, welcome to the show. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this.
Absolutely, brother. You got a podcast called Most Excellent. I got to see what it's all about,
Right on, right on. One other thing that I want to throw out there real quick. We were supposed to be back in the studio this week. Unfortunately, Tyler is a little under the weather. So we decided that I would just shoot the remote from my house once again. So I appreciate him even stepping up and being here to record this for us and, do all the editing afterwards and all that good stuff because he's not feeling well. So probably in a couple weeks, because we're shooting a couple episodes today, but in a couple weeks, we'll be back in the studio, which is a very cool setting. This is just kind of me in the bedroom with a blurry background. But you do what you got to do to get the information out there and to get this done. So
before we hit record, we're talking about thankless jobs. There is no thankless job than post. So look, I was a post person when I was in grad school, when I was in film school, and long hours and dark rooms, man.
Definitely. Yeah, and I mean, I pay him, but I don't pay him nearly enough. So I appreciate it, man. He's really doing this to get us out there and to get to just. I mean, this was all my idea. And he's a producer. He's a talented guy, but he's allowing me to do something that I think is important, which is explore the creative journey of creative people, and I think it's cool to get that out there and let people know that you don't give up no matter what. There's a reason that we're all doing this, whether it's waking up every morning or whether it's doing all the amazing things that you've done. It's all amazing. It's
Absolutely, brother.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, you have done several things. So the way that we like to start things out is we start at the beginning. So where
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a whole journey here. So what was your first creative endeavor?
Wow. First creative endeavor. Okay, yeah. So when I was in high school, I was a finance guy. I was going to
Okay.
be a finance person for the rest of my career. I was growing up in New York. That was kind of like a dedicated path, right? Everyone just thought if you handled money, you'll make money. When I went to undergrad in Florida at a liberal arts college, there weren't many finance classes, but I really wanted to do communication. And I'm not really sure what that was at the time. I just thought TVs and doing industrial commercials, but I learned news gathering. I learned journalism. I learned about finding interesting stories in the neighborhood that my college was at, and that to me was the first like brush with creativity. But in the back of my head, being a performer was always something I wanted to do, but I was too shy at the time. And so being able to find a kooky character, like say a motorcycle not gang, but most like a group leader who's also a barber and making that into a kind of a funny news story was like the first time I could like really sink my teeth in something creative.
Awesome. So was the behind the scenes stuff like the producing and the directing, was that what you did first, or
Absolutely. So when I was a kid, I wanted to be an actor.
Gotcha.
And I'm of a certain age. So if you remember, the Power Rangers were having their second movie called Turbo, and
Yeah.
they were doing this giant like casting call to find the next Kid Ranger. Because for those who don't know about Power Rangers, that was the one where the kid like morphs into a teenager.
Ah,
I thought that was going to be my dream, and I didn't get it. But of course, at that age, you're like, what? But I was also very shy. I had terrible acne. I was also a heavy set kid. So when I was 17, 18, I just thought, well, I wasn't going to be in front of the camera at all. And so my parents, who were immigrants, didn't quite understand what it meant to be an actor performer, but it was a much easier sell to say, oh, I'll be an editor because I'll be working with the computers. I'll be a writer. I'll be working with other people who are scientists in their field, quote unquote. And that kind of was like my entry into the whole process.
gotcha. Okay, um, so did you do the producing or the directing first? Because I always think producing is interesting because that's kind of where you help fund the film. Is that sort of how the producing deal
Uh,
works? Like,
in film, yes, a film producer is someone that usually secures the funding or has some
okay,
creative input. In news
gotcha.
gathering, producing is more like it's your concept, and you tell someone,
Right,
"Make me 8 minutes about this." Go.
right. Yeah, okay, gotcha. Yeah, it was so I very recently started listening to a lot of music podcasts, and this is just another side of producing, I guess. But I had no idea what the producer for an album does.
Oh yeah, for
And
sure.
apparently what they do is they just go, yeah, that sounds good. This doesn't sound good. This should sound a little more like this. They kind of direct traffic, but the engineer is the one who actually puts the sound together, and then the mixer is the one who finishes it. But then the producer kind of has an overview of everything,
Oh yeah,
and
that
yeah, and
that's
that's
that's roll bloat, right? Because if you're in your
yeah, that's
bedroom, you're doing it all.
interesting job, man. You and I guess that's why producers always get a certain sound. So when you were producing movies, did you look for a certain kind of movie to produce, or were you just sort of trying to get your fingers in a lot of different pots? Like, how did that work out?
So when you start off with anything, you do something that you're passionate about, right? You're like, oh man, this is a cool story. How do we get the funds to do it? How can we work with other people? But I think it ended up evolving into a brand, right? After you do it a couple
Sure,
times, there's just certain projects you gravitate towards. If you're a horror person or a genre person, or if you want to do stories for a certain demographic or what have you. For me, it was definitely general interest. So when I was in film school, there was this worship of like the Pulp Fictions and like the kind of like the Kiss Kiss Bang Bangs, and so I did like counter programming. Like I looked out for general comedies, general dramas, family dynamics, just because it was the opposite of what was going on at the time.
right, cool. So trying to keep the other genres alive, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I love the stuff they were doing. It was just kind of like, why put yourself in a pool that's already crowded, right?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And so what's the experience like directing a film?
Yeah. So when it comes to the movie process, it is a lot arduous than people think it is. They think of sit in the director's chair and be like, "Oh, I put this and that," and then make that happen. But you're
Right,
basically a CEO of the movie company, right? The buck stops with you, but you answer to other people. So in this case, if you're doing film, you answer to the producers who secured you the funding of why you're not on budget, why you're not on time. But the actual mechanics of directing is that you get your actors and then you rehearse with them and you do the blocking to make sure they are making the script come to life. So that could be very exhilarating and thrilling. What's not thrilling is when you have a shot list for that day and the AD goes, assistant director goes, yeah, we can't be here for more than 40 minutes. So either
oh man,
do it or skip it or collapse some shots or what have you.
right. So you said that you were shy as a kid, and that's kind of why you decided to go more towards the behind the scenes thing. Other than, it was also a good move for convincing your parents to allow you to be a creative person. Um, so I actually tried my hand at. Do you do stand up, or do you just do or do you do comedic roles? Like, how
Yeah.
what is
Oh, I am not an actor. I
yeah.
do stand up. I have two stand up specials available now on Spotify. So stand up's
Oh,
my thing.
awesome. So I because because everywhere I looked, I just saw comedian, and I was like, okay, there's so many different kinds of comedians. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I actually tried my hand at stand up
Oh, how'd it
because
go?
I think I'm a funny guy. I mean, it didn't go well.
It's
So
not
much
supposed
of
to go well.
yeah, yeah,
It's supposed to be terrible the first
yeah,
5 years you do it. Yeah.
right. And so much of stand up comedy is in the delivery. Um, and I'm just wondering how you transitioned from a shy kid to someone who was capable of standing up in front of people,
Yeah.
and how did that process work out?
Well, if you did I feel bad telling the story a lot, but I do think it's
Yeah.
important. Like it definitely changed my life. So I was a heavy kid. When I was in my mid 20s, I weighed 375 pounds. Just for context, that's a 6 extra large shirt and a 56 waist pants. Right? I was a biggin, and
Yeah.
I started going to the gym and working out, and I lost 150 pounds. And doing that, it's great, but I had a bunch of loose skin right everywhere. I still have pockets of loose skin. It's kind of gross, but it's my body, whatever. I
Yeah.
got the surgery to get the skin removed. It's called an amnioplasty or tummy tuck or in a fleur-de-lis tummy tuck. So I have a scar that runs from my chest down to the boys and my waist, right? It's a
Wow.
giant inverse T.
Wow.
After that surgery, I had a complication where my suture line had reopened up. And one night, 4 days after my surgery, I was bleeding out of my couch. I mean, the wound was like that long, right? 4 inches long, about an inch and a half wide gash. So blood's just pouring out, and I think I'm going to die. And it's funny when you have a near-death experience, you freak out like, oh my gosh, and then to the point where you don't. Like anyone who's ever hit rock bottom or is close to ODing will tell you, it's like you get to a point where you're like, I'm okay with whatever
Yeah.
happens. And
Yeah.
I had some regrets. I said I wish I had more money. I wish I made out with more girls, you know. But the
Yeah.
big regrets I had, funnily enough, was you never tried stand up comedy and you never tried to ride a motorcycle. And I said at the time, if I survive this, I'll find a way to do those. And so my mom showed up. I was bleeding out. We did like a wet compress. The blood had congealed in place, basically making a block, so I didn't bleed out. I woke up the next day and I looked for motorcycle classes. And then 6 months later, for my birthday, my girlfriend at the time gave me a Groupon for a comedy class. And so I started doing comedy through a class. I know some OGs are like, "Oh man, no, don't do classes. Go out there and do it." But I did do a class
Yeah. Hey.
because I was like, "Well, how do I start?" Right? I'm in LA, but how do I start? But the reason why I started it was once you see death, and you're like, oh man, I'm close to doing it, you really don't care anymore. So it's like I
Right.
gotta try it now because I can get hit by a bus tomorrow. So
Yeah.
and it's been 10 years. August 2014 is my first show. And it's been a journey ever since.
Awesome, man. That is awesome. Now, it's funny because I had always assumed like all of my favorite comedians wrote their own stuff. Um, but then I saw like Chris Rock barely writes any of his jokes, or at least in the '90s, he barely wrote any of his jokes. Like I got a couple of his CDs, and all the jokes were written by other people.
Hmm.
Um, and that kind of made me like it made me kind of realize that a lot of being a stand-up comedian isn't about writing the jokes. He still approves the jokes, and he still, like I said, so much of it is about the delivery. You can tell the funniest joke in the world, and if it doesn't land, it's there'll be a couple people who will laugh because it's the funniest joke in the world. But
Yeah.
but do you have people who you collaborate with, or do you write everything on your own?
So the short answer to that question first, I write all my jokes
Sure.
myself because I'm not famous
Awesome.
yet, right? If I'm
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
what happens is when you hit a certain level, there's
yeah.
certain comedians that have a writer's room. Like Conan was
Right,
like that, right? You will go
right.
in and the guy would submit a joke and you go, yes, no, yes, no. But what happens if you're like someone who is their own brand, their own voice, and they're touring, they have people they call to bounce jokes off of. So I call my brother and I go, yeah, I got some jokes. We think this is pretty funny, and he's okay. But you get to a certain level, once you call someone and go, I'm working on something. What do you think? They go, well, try this. And I want my writer's credit because you use my influence. So
Gotcha. Yeah.
there are some people who have structured writer teams. I'm not knocking that because hey, they got more money than I do. But almost everyone has that small core of people that they ask and they bounce jokes off of. But if you're making millions of dollars, they want to cut too. And so that's why you'll
Yeah.
say co-written by, whatever, 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 whatever. But I would
Gotcha.
say 95% of the jokes I have are just me. And the other five is my brother goes, hey, how about that? You remember that last time that happened? You're like, oh yeah. you know?
Nice. Nice. Awesome. Um, so pro wrestling. Uh, I am wearing a shirt from my old pro wrestling promotion. I
Oh
was a
yeah.
wrestling I was a wrestling promoter for years. I've actually done a lot of stuff in the wrestling business.
Heck yeah.
Um, so how did you get involved in wrestling? Was that kind of a love of it and just just how did that go?
I actually write about this in my book because it's so stupidly random how I got into it. So, lifelong fan. I'm from New York, and so that's a big part of it because my local federation was a World Wrestling Federation. So I
Yeah.
know, like, I had to get to learn WCW and Georgia South a little bit later. I always wanted to do it. I was also very, very heavy, so I knew I couldn't do it. But back in
Right.
2010, I had just graduated film school. And of course, I didn't have a job because no one wants to hire directors. And I went to SummerSlam that year, that was in Los Angeles, and I saw a guy giving out flyers. I thought it was a dude giving out flyers. And I said, hey, look, it's always been my dream to be a ring announcer. Could I have an opportunity? He goes, oh, yeah, sure. Didn't notice at the time, but it was John Ian, rest his soul, who was a promoter of Mach 1 wrestling in Anaheim. And I went from Glendale to Anaheim, which is literally north to south, cross county,
Oh
every
man.
Friday for months looking for this opportunity. And then 3 months in, I won't forget, it was like the second week in November. And I go, John, I don't want to wait. I want to pay my dues, but I don't want to waste your time. Am I even going to get a chance? Then I'll keep coming. If I'm not, then forget it. And he's like, hey, man, thanks for being forward. We're going to let you be the backstage interviewer. And a backstage
Yeah.
interviewer for an independent wrestling promotion isn't nearly as glamorous as what's happening
Yeah.
on Monday
Yeah.
and Thursday
Yeah.
nights. You're like, hey, what do you think? And these guys who are so green, they're like, I'm going to beat you up tomorrow. You're like, there you have it. So
Yeah.
I hated it, but it got me in the door. So I did that. One time a guy couldn't make it on commentary. So I said, I'll do it. And I became a commentator, which is great because you're on commentary, but that also means you're a part of ring crew, which wasn't as great. And then
Yeah.
towards the end, I actually got a chance to ring announce a couple of times, and that was a lot of fun too. So the answer to your question was I just took a flyer from a wrestling show and just did not disappear. I came back week in and
That's
week out
awesome.
and wore them down.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, ring crew is the most thankless job in wrestling. Half the time, those guys don't even get paid. They're
Mhm.
just killing themselves, And if the ring doesn't get set up on time, you do not have a show.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, it's thankfully now I think that stuff is changing a little bit as far as the lack of pay. Like I feel like everybody gets a few bucks at least now, but it's not what people think. Independent wrestling is a different animal, man.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Because you can't charge mom and pop $60 for a ticket, like if you're
right.
if you're in
Yeah,
the hood, right? So
yeah, for sure. So, just a little aside, because um, growing up in New York, did you have WPIX?
yeah, New York's
Were
movie
they,
station.
yeah, were they still showing the AWA then, or was the AWA over at that point?
It was pretty much over. So I got
Okay,
into wrestling in about 93.
gotcha.
So it was kind
Yeah,
of
it's like the
gone.
very end of it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
that was actually my first introduction really to pro wrestling. Was the AWA NWA All Star show that they used to do on WPIX. So even though I grew up in New York, but upstate, but even though
Okay.
I grew up in New York, I saw Midwest wrestling first,
Oh,
and
that's
it's
awesome.
yeah, and I've been in love with the wrestling out here ever since. So it was kind of cool to move out here and be a part of it. Um, and people don't expect that. They expect more of a story like you. Oh, you grew up in New York, you grew up on WWF, and yes, but
Right.
I also, my first exposure was the Freebirds and the High Flyers and that, so it's a different deal. So
Fast ring.
That's pretty cool.
Hey.
Um, so you've mentioned your book a few different times. What I tried writing a book. It's hard.
Yes,
It's really hard. Like grouping it together, especially I'm assuming yours is a nonfiction book.
the last one
Oh,
is yes.
okay. So writing a nonfiction book, especially like just remembering stuff. You know, I mean, how what was that process like? Like, how did you? What made you decide to do it? Because it's impossible. And how did you actually accomplish it? Like,
I wrote my nonfiction book out of spite because I consider myself a fiction writer first.
yeah,
So if you ask, okay, you're a comedian, you're a master of ceremony, you're a podcaster, broadcaster, what do you describe yourself? I describe myself as a writer first. But my last book, my last novel, novella, Pay the Vig, which was a Vegas story, did so poorly that even my mom was like, "This ain't it, champ." And I was like, "Damn," you know. And I was going to quit. I was like, "Look, if I'm selling a product that no one's buying, then it's time to go."
yeah,
It's a pandemic, and I decided to say, hey, look, if I'm going to quit writing, I'm going to write a book of all my failures, chapter for chapter, of all the things I've done as an adult, all the things that were bad, and say this would be the last book I ever did. And that was called Graduation Day, because in theory, I was graduating from writing books because no one was buying them. But
right,
calling it Graduation Day took me back to my college days when I graduated undergrad and other undergrad schools had like Conan O'Brien and Oprah Winfrey and
yeah,
Elon Musk or whatever. And we had the district manager of Walmart telling us how to achieve. And I said, this sucks. No disrespect to
um,
Walmart. I love Walmart over Target, but it was like, really? And
yeah,
so the idea and concept came together of like all my failures as an adult. What would I tell someone who was graduating college? Their advice, real practical advice. And that became Graduation Day. So to answer your question, I think a lot of us sit down and go, I'm going to write a book about my life. And your life is so big. There's no structure. It's day in, day out, 24/7. You don't know where to start. You kind of forget details. And then the ones you don't forget, you come off as being better. But I think what made Graduation Day easy for me was what would I tell a theoretical person about this? And I was like, okay, great. Like, what would be my thing about wrestling? What would be my
yeah,
advice about starting a business? And that became the chapters, that became the books. And once you figure out
awesome.
who the audience is, it's easy peasy.
Yeah, okay, cool, awesome. Um, so you mentioned also that you consider yourself more of a nonfiction writer than a
I just myself more fiction. Like Graduation Day
or more
was a
fiction. I'm
mistake.
sorry, I
Yeah,
misspoke. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Didn't I'm trying to remember. Didn't you say that you were venturing into the world of comic books?
Yes, I had ventured before. I had a superhero book called Silver Streak, and then I had like a graphic novel called Legacy that was in this Indiana Jones vein. Talk about no one buying anything. So
Right,
I
right,
was also burnt out because I didn't realize how niche comic books were. But I worked with my friend Andrew Maxwell and Max Davenport, and we have a new comic book called First Place Losers, which is like F1 meets Gundam about this world in the future that actually races mechs on a circuit. So it's pretty cool to go back into that and build a whole world. I was actually in charge of more of the lore, so naming of the teams and the color schemes and the types of mechs has been a lot of fun.
that's awesome. Yeah, I am also a huge comic book fan. So,
Oh,
um,
nice.
yeah,
Who's your
yeah, and
guy?
I
Do you have a guy? Who's your favorite character or superhero or
oh, my favorite character is Dick Grayson.
okay, all right,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Nightwing himself.
easily. Yeah, man, growing up, the New Teen Titans was probably the biggest comic book at the time. So, and I obviously knew him from Batman and Robin.
Sure.
Um, but Marv Wolfman is such a talented writer, and he brought those characters to life. And honestly, to this day, as a 50-year-old man, I feel like Dick Grayson and Wally West um, are my friends. You know, so
Oh
it's
yeah.
a really cool thing. I actually um, wrote a comic book too that never got finished.
Oh
So
no, yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Is it gonna be finished soon or coming soon?
Oh, it was years ago. I had a roommate who was an artist, and man, I don't know. He was involved in movies too, and he wrote storyboards and stuff like that. So he was like, I can translate this to comic books. And so he wrote these giant storyboards and they were beautiful. Um, but we never finished. We just
Yeah.
never finished.
Well,
So
there's
I
there's
don't
always
know.
time, brother. You still can do it.
Yeah, especially now, like um with Kickstarter, I mean you can practically produce your own stuff with Kickstarter. It's pretty cool. It's an interesting time for creative people between Kickstarter and Bandcamp and Spotify and this kind of stuff. We were actually talking to our last guest about he had to shut down his old podcast when he first started because it just got to be too much, like financially.
Hmm.
Um, but literally, like this podcast costs me what I pay Tyler, and Tyler has his own equipment because he's a producer. I mean, I'm sure he has a heavier investment than I do, but and then Tyler's time and my time and the guest's time. I mean,
Right.
that is an amazing thing to think about. Like, there's an overload in some senses, but it's also very cool that people who are creative have so many outlets to get their stuff out there now.
Yeah.
Um,
It's just unfortunate now we're in a downturn in our economy in the United
yeah,
States, of course. So there's always like, oh man, I see what you're doing. Can't help you, but keep
yeah,
on,
yeah,
player.
yeah, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
Oh man, so this is just something funny. Last night I was watching the replay of NXT. I don't know if you caught that or not.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
have an NXT podcast.
gotcha. So when they set up the tag team and the tag team match, and he said something about something playa.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
the callback to Teddy Long. I thought that was cool. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I was like,
Holla,
right
holla.
on. Yeah, yeah. Teddy Long was a big deal when I was like the guy was around forever. So I grew up
Oh.
watching Teddy Long too.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
this is what number one Undertaker matches. So what's funny about our podcast, it's called Draped in Gold,
yeah,
and we cover NXT. We do it in kayfabe. So that started because the Draped in Gold was a UK NXT UK show, and we wanted to
gotcha.
like rag on things we didn't like, but we didn't want to be mean because nobody was really watching NXT UK.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
so my broadcast colleague Jack and I, we do it as if it's real. We go, oh, I can't believe that Lola Vice has lost two matches in a row. What's going through her mind? Like it's just it's
awesome.
the
Like
most dumb.
the old magazines, man.
Yeah.
Um, I remember. So I don't know. Are you familiar with Liz Hunter?
No.
Okay, so she was a writer for Pro Wrestling Illustrated years ago. It was actually supposedly it was her concept to make the PWI 500. So
Oh.
supposedly she's the person who came up with that. That was the lore anyway. But she did an article where she went to Stan Hansen's ranch to get the recipe for his family chili, and he almost killed her. And that was written as like a serious piece that wrestling fans read, and they were like, Stan Hansen is crazy. It
Right.
was a two-part piece in one of their magazines. And it's just like, man, the way that they framed that stuff, and just and as a 12-year-old kid, I was 100% in.
It
I
seems
was like,
plausible,
man,
right?
what's that, brother?
It seemed plausible, right?
Yeah,
Old man's like, no, leave my chili alone.
Stan Hansen is nuts. I was like, man, Miss Hunter almost lost her life trying to get this chili recipe for Pro Wrestling Illustrated. This is crazy, man.
I remember reading the WWF magazine and then graduating over to Raw magazine, thinking I was like an intellectual. So,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
I totally get that. The
Yeah.
kayfabe is not kayfabe.
Right, right. I remember, yeah, because Fitz Russo was in charge of the Raw magazine at the time, I think, and he kind of tried to slip some stuff in there. Um, and wasn't that around the time that WoW was big too, when the
The
Raw magazine was coming out?
the
So
first WoW,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, WoW was. I remember when WoW came out, me and all my friends were just. It was like the internet before the internet, but it really wasn't. I mean, they still stuck with the storylines and stuff. They would just also talk about behind the scenes things,
I think because
if
their
you will.
photos were like way more raw. You're like,
Yeah,
what's going on? Like Raven's
yeah,
bleeding on the cover? Like it's just
yeah. It's insane, man.
yeah.
Yeah, and it was a big deal. I remember Bill Apter writing the first editorial in that where he was talking about how he spent his whole life protecting the wrestling business, but now it was time to pull back the curtain,
Oh
and it was
wow.
just like, whoa,
Yeah.
that was a big deal for him to put that in there. So that was pretty cool. So one thing that we've noticed kind of as a string through these podcasts, the guys from Kickstand Jenny, who was the first one that we did. Their guitar player was ready to cash it in. He decided he was just going to write one more album, and once that album was finished, he wasn't going to make music anymore.
Hmm.
But then that album ended up being the most successful thing he's ever done, and now Kickstand Jenny's working on an EP, and they might go on the road. Um, Mickey Magnum from Wisconsin has cancer, and he lives with it every day because it's a radiation deal. Like he can't. It's not. It's not susceptible to radiation, so it has to be cut out every time he gets it.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So every 6 months he goes in for a scan, and it could be the time when they tell him, it's in a place where we can't cut it out.
Hmm.
Um, our last guest, Archie, has glaucoma. He has 1% vision. He went through a lot of personal stuff, and you've obviously had your challenges too, and your successes and your failures. So, as a creative person, what is it about? I don't want to throw myself into that category, but at the same time, I sort of am. Like, what do you think it is that keeps us going? Like, despite everything, like, why do you continue to create? Why do you continue to, because the successes and the highs, I mean, they're great, and then but there's also, it seems like some tragedy involved in everyone who is a creative person. And I mean, you have your own story too that we've heard today. So what is it that keeps you creating and throwing stuff out there in the world?
Yeah, that is a very valid question because you're right. I think about Hannah Gadsby when she had that last comedy special called Nanette, and people thought that was going to be the last one. She said it as much. She blew up, and she goes, "Oh, I'm making more." I think the sad and tragic part about what we do, and that's artists and creatives, is that the commerce, the money side is always going to be there. We can be about the art, we can be just about getting better, but we have to pay bills.
Yeah,
And that is the biggest like shock to a lot of people, right? Even if you have a patron, those don't really exist anymore in the traditional sense. They pay you so you can create. So a lot of times we have like this voice or perspective, and we go, "Listen, I gotta grow up. I gotta think about my kid or my body. I'm going to give up." But that kind of fuels us more to say, "Hey, look, we're on this boat in the middle of a dark ocean. One more flare, and I'm going to give up." All right, two more flares and I'm going to give up. I think that's what pushes us a lot of times too. But I also think that we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace. Sometimes we stop things. Like right now, I had to do my last show, my comedy show in the spring. I'm not done, but I'm saying, look, this summer I want to focus on the comic book, focus on the podcast, and get back to it as well because we got to do things that generate revenue. And that's always going to be the balance left or right. We want to be like it's all about the craft, but all about the cash as well.
yeah. It's funny because when we asked Archie about why he keeps going, because he's had a lot of challenges, but he has so much stuff going on. His answer was literally like, I am trying to make enough money, one, to get off Social Security because he's blind, so he's on Social Security, and two, to leave money for his wife and daughter.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just that I was just like, wow, that's real, you know. Um, like you have a creative spark, and you feel like the creative spark is your best thing to put forward, I guess. But at the end of the day, money is important,
Yeah.
and it's um, so. are you gonna put the comic book stuff out on Kickstarter, or do you guys already have financing for that? Like, how's that gonna go?
So a little bit, yes. So currently, First Place Losers is the name of the mech book. It's available now on Kickstarter. Got certified a project we love, which is great. But as far as
Awesome.
financing it, and this is what I learned. The first time when I did Kickstarter, it was like, all right, if you guys give me the money, I'm gonna finish the book. And I don't think people are more inclined to jump on support that way. So
Yeah,
Max Davenport and Andrew Maxwell and myself, we put the money up. So the book is finished. The book is
awesome,
finished now, but the Kickstarter is going to help us with printing and shipping. If we get
awesome.
more, great. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But we're basically doing like it's not gambling if you think the money's already gone, sort of
yeah,
thing, which
yeah.
puts a lot of pressure off of us because we're already bought in. We just want to
Right,
make sure people are introduced to this world, enamored with the world, want to see more with the world, maybe get money on the back end, maybe see more issues being made. But I really feel like Kickstarter is a tool. It cannot be your end all be all, especially now when things are just so expensive. A dozen eggs at my store is now $5, which
right,
forget it.
right. Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah. I mean, it was so crazy. Speaking of eggs and milk, when milk was under $2 before the pandemic started, and then it got up to $4, and then it started going back down, and I was so happy, and now it's up over $3 again. And this is in Connorsville, Indiana. So
Yeah,
I can't imagine what it's like out in California.
it's not
Everything is,
cheap. It's not,
yeah,
and the sales
yeah,
tax is up to the roof. So,
man, I'm sure. So, yeah, I actually got burned one time on Kickstarter.
Mhm.
Uh, and I'm not, I don't know if it was because the guy underestimated the costs of everything and didn't have his book finished. But when it all got done, all he gave out was the digital rewards, and I am a physical guy.
Right.
So I it was a comic book, and I ordered the actual comic book, and never got it. And apparently no one did, and there was a lot of people contacting the guy, and he just at first he was like, "Well, I've had a lot of stuff going on in my life," but then he just ignored it. So he
Sure.
sort of ran off with our money, and I have a friend who paid a pretty large amount of money to be a character in the comic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was I'm not gonna say what it was, that's tacky. But the guy actually on Substack has a new novel out. And oh man, it's so hard for me not to be that guy who goes, "Hey, where's my comic book from 5 years ago?" You know?
Well, first
But
of all, you're completely within your right. So I would suggest you do that. But I
yeah,
think you hit on something very important here. That's the risk aversion from patrons, right? We wonder why movies are the same stories over and over again. It's because some bean counter probably got
yeah,
burned on a cloud atlas and says, I'm not doing that again. And that's really what stifles art. Because yeah, if you have hesitation using Kickstarter, Kickstarter is the biggest platform. When the next person comes on, there'll be less people willing to donate. And so that's another
yeah,
issue for us, you know?
yeah. Thankfully, it really only happened that one time. Uh, so I had some issues with GoFundMe, but for whatever reason, every time I've donated to a GoFundMe, it's been for CDs, and the
Mhm.
CDs, they always left me off the list of people who donated.
Oh, that's
So
that's
weird, right?
yeah, that's
Like
weird.
all 3 times, they were like, "Oh, we're not seeing you on our list," and they had to go back and find my pledge after everyone got their CDs.
Hmm.
And one person never delivered the CD to me, but the other two were Buffalo Tom and Jeffrey Gaines, so they're kind of bigger names. So they worked it out. But yeah, I think um I think we're gonna wrap things up here. We've gone over pretty much everything there is to go over in brief at this point. I just wanted to ask you if there's anything you want to talk about as far as upcoming projects, where people can find you, ongoing projects. Floor is yours, man.
Well, first of all, the most excellent entertainment podcast, fantastic show. Thanks so much about asking me about me. That's one of my favorite subjects. Yeah, you can follow me online. I have a couple places online that you can check me out. Flobito.com. That's FLOBITO.com. If you want to book me as a master of ceremonies or a TJ or a podcaster or a host for your event, that's where you go. But between you and I, and your listeners, because we're a bunch of cool friends now, I'm actually back in the blogging space. Since I have become a baseball journalist over the past 2 seasons, I have a new blog where I get to talk about sports in a comedic way. It's called justthesandwich.com. It's justthesandwich.com. So if you want to see what's being released in your favorite sport, but with a little bit of jokes in there, justthesandwich.com.
Awesome. Thank you for mentioning the DJ stuff and the sports coverage, because I said I think we've covered everything, and then we didn't cover everything because you have so much, man.
We're good, man. It's fine. I do a lot
Yeah,
of jobs because I don't have a 9 to 5. So
right on. I totally meant to ask you about the Flobito, and because it's such an interesting persona. You know what? Let's do it. Where
yeah.
did that come from, man? Where did the idea come up? Where did the name come from? Like, how did
Yeah.
that all come about? That's cool.
It is funny. So the short answer is Flobito is the name of my first car. So I'm Flobo, and then my first car is like my baby. It was a '99 Toyota Camry Solara, the 2-door, and I called it Flobito. But as far as that becoming my DJ name, it's 2 reasons. The first reason was Flobo.com was taken, if you could believe that. There was a DJ in
Wow.
Germany at the time who had Flobo.com, so I needed something else for SEO. But when I started doing DJing work, especially in the wedding space, there weren't many DJs that were willing to do island Latin music. So I'm West Indian. My parents are from a British colony, but I'm from New York. I have Puerto Rican friends. I have Dominican friends. I have friends from Cuba. But all the DJs out here were playing like Mexican regional or Central American. So I wanted a brand. I tell people like this, I'm not Latin at all, but I wanted a
Right.
brand that let people know, hey, look, if you want reggae, if you want cumbia, if you want son, I'm your guy, and I'm not an old person. You know what I mean? You don't have to fly your friend out from Miami to do it. And so it became like a co-branding thing. So it became like, Hola, Flobito. But people ask me all the time, like, wait, are you Flobo? Are you Flobito? Which one are you? I'm like, legally, when I DJ, Flobito, but you can call me
Nice.
Flobo.
Awesome, man. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm glad that you brought that up, like I said, because I meant to bring it up, and I make notes before the podcast, but I like to kind of toss them to the side because I don't want to look like I'm reading off a paper when we're doing this.
Oh, me too. Greatly appreciate it,
Yeah.
man. Because I've been in those podcasts where like question 8. So if you were a
Right.
banana, you're like, oh,
Right. And because of the way the podcast is, like, we want to go over your journey as an entertainer. There is sort of a structure to it, but I also like to have conversations. So just having stuff written down, I mean, doesn't work for me. I'm kind of like Craig Ferguson. I tear the card up and throw it away.
Such
So
a genius.
yeah. Oh man. Yeah. I love Craig Ferguson. His stuff was amazing. Definitely. He's probably my favorite late night talk show host ever. Honestly.
I was I'm a big late talk show junkie and historian. Cause
Yeah,
the dream
sure.
in my life to do one of my shows. So I didn't appreciate Craig Ferguson, but I saw him live, and that is completely improv. Like I thought he'd like another like note under his desk. Like no, he actually rips it up and has the conversation, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, and that's honestly, I know that a lot of people don't like that because they want to be prepared, but man, that's the way this should go. It should just be conversations. Really, really getting to know each other and getting to know where we're coming from as people.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, all right, thank you so much, Flobo, for your time.
Thank
Tyler and M&E Studios, or ME Studios. I'm sorry, can't do this without you, brother. Hope you get to feeling better. And like I said, we'll be back in the studio in a couple weeks. So I am Keith, and this has been the Most Excellent Entertainment Podcast. Thank you so much for following along, and have a great day.